This president has been so focused from really day one on the forgotten men and women of this country, whether it is, the single mom living in Detroit trying to raise her children, whether it is the single dad living in South Texas who just wants a great education for their kids, is across the board the First Step Act, whether it's our men and women who are returning from prison who just want a second chance to really live the American dream. But there's a pretty big swath of the forgotten men and women in this country who are part of the human trafficking ring. And you don't hear people talk about that as much, but across the world, there are almost 25 million men and women and children who are considered part of modern day slavery. They're trafficked. Here in America, it's almost 25,000 people, mostly women and children, who are trafficked every single day. So from almost the beginning of this administration, the president has been very focused on what can I do to change that, and understanding what a huge tragedy it is for this country. And if it's going to happen in America, it will happen everywhere around the world. As we know, we are the leaders. So today, in just, a couple hours, Attorney General Barr and Ivanka Trump, myself, and several others are going to be hosting a roundtable talking about and announcing a $35 million grant from the Department of Justice that will focus on housing for the women and children and men who currently are in the human trafficking system, but because of the COVID, because of the plague, they have not been able to get out. They've really been required to stay at home in many cases with the very person that's trafficking them. So it is just one step of many over the last 3.5 years of this president really focusing on this issue and making it a priority. And today is just one of those steps, but it is an important step, especially recognizing where the country is today with the pandemic and what we need to do to really lift up and help those who need our help the most.
So I got some stats from HHS. They reported that there is a 40% increase in the number of crisis trafficking situations reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. During the same period, it was reported there was nearly a doubling of situations in which people needed immediate emergency shelter. So there's a lot more demand for people who are calling this hotline. Is it because of COVID that people feel like they need someplace to go?
I think that's right. We'll need to get through the pandemic and then look back and do real research, but it makes perfect sense, right? That the 40% increase in the cases, the absolute desperate need for shelter, because especially in a lot of the states that have completely locked their citizenry down, these women and their children can't get out of the house. And, it's interesting, you think back the last couple of months, the president has been so focused on reopening the economy and getting kids back in school and really trying to get the country back to where we were just 4 or 5 months ago. And it is important, and the priority is to, get people back to work, to get the economy moving again. But the forgotten children and men and women of America who are, we've been fighting for from day one, but they're the ones who are impacted the most by this shutdown. It's really interesting to see those on the left and a lot of our Democrat leaders who are focusing on the president putting everyone at risk and not caring about the lives of our country and our citizens, but it's exactly the opposite. We've got to get the economy reopened and kids back in school so that we can really focus on those who are being hurt the most by this pandemic. And it really is our trafficked men and women. It's our children from our vulnerable communities who were already in a dire situation educationally, but now, instead of being a little behind, they may never catch up. And it just, population after population after population from those vulnerable communities, that's what we're focused on here. And that's today what part of the announcement is really going to talk about.
And so it's $35 million, and you mentioned 25,000 victims per day. What's the math there? Do you anticipate there's going to be additional funding to go beyond the $35 million?
There's a lot of funding already in the system that's focused on the trafficking lane. I think this president has signed 9 pieces of legislation. There have been grants focused from across the government on trafficking, from everything from housing to labor, et cetera. Today is singularly focused on housing for these victims. It will flow through the states and through different organizations to make sure that money gets to the people who need it the most. But at the end of the day, it is an issue that is not going away anytime soon, but that no president and no White House has focused more upon than we have. We have a full-time person that was brought on under an executive order the president signed, I think about a year ago, that, again, first time for a White House to focus on this issue. And when you think about, the president gets a lot of pushback on his immigration stance, but at the end of the day, when you talk about safe and secure borders, really the people you're trying to protect are those women and their children who are crossing, who are trying to get to America, who immediately get put into a trafficking lane and are never able to escape. And so it's all part of the president's larger vision, frankly, of prosperity, of safety and security, of a country that works best for all of its citizens, not just for some of its citizens. And I think in the 3.5 years, he's really proven that out. But now, as we move forward, we've given a new set of circumstances, which is the pandemic, and being able to be nimble and be able to react to that situation, the pandemic, and especially these women and children who are now even worse off because of it, because of their situations. That's what today's about, but that's what we'll continue to focus on moving forward.
And you mentioned earlier that, in your view, this issue of human trafficking is not getting enough media coverage. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? And do you think it might be in part because it speaks to this broader issue that you're talking about, which is border control?
I think that's right. I think that anytime that the president has led on a major issue, that there's just a lot of people who don't want to give him credit for that. And I also think that there is a lot, our country is obviously divided. We have a culture that basically says from the left, if you don't agree with me, we're going to fire you, cancel you, whatever it is that we need to do to only fit into our box. And the idea that this president has led on the issue of human trafficking, that he's led on the issue of criminal justice reform, that he's led on the issue of opioid overdose, that he's led on the issue of suicide prevention. These aren't typically issues you think of a Republican leading on, although they should, because we always have. But when we do, he's not going to get the credit for that, but that's okay, because he just doubles down and continues fighting for the American people. We keep doing, I think, transformative work that really affects every American, but especially those who need it the most. You think about our vulnerable communities. A lot of these trafficking victims are a big part of those vulnerable communities, our inner cities, especially in some of the bigger inner cities around the country. It's been generations of welfare and bad education opportunity and moving into the criminal justice system, into prison, dropout rates. It's generational. And the idea that a businessman from New York would come in and basically disrupt the whole system, which he has, is so hard for those on the other side to swallow, and certainly never to give recognition or appreciation for what he's done.
And you mentioned these big cities where the trafficking is occurring or along the border. Why do you think for a lot of Americans this concept of human trafficking in some respects seems very foreign, that it seems like it's maybe more of an international problem? Why do you think some Americans don't understand how prevalent it is here, number one? And then number two, what could your average viewer do if they suspect that there might be some abuse or trafficking, or what can your average person do at home? I mean, we don't want people to be, taking law into their own hands. We don't need a bunch of, right. Lone Rangers out there. But
yes.
What are some of the warning signs that people can watch for on this issue?
That's such a great question. I think that, to answer the first part, I think that we live in the United States of America, and we can't even imagine a world, most of us. I came from a very rural, small town in Texas. I didn't come from any great amount of wealth and paid my way through all of my school. So I don't want to suggest that I'm from a different place than I am. I feel like I am from the heart of America and the best of America, where no matter where you're from or what you believe or what your last name is, if you work hard enough, anything is possible. And certainly proving that out being in the White House today, I think, not about me, but about the American dream. But I think in a country where anything really is possible in the best way, it's hard to imagine that we've got 25,000, mostly women and children in our country who are basically modern day slaves. And it is one that it's just hard to even comprehend you see it on the news happening in other parts of the world where you can comprehend it, where you've got dictatorships and tyrannies and you've got just really bad people doing really bad things. But this is America. And so the fact that this president and Ivanka Trump, his senior advisor, and our domestic policy council, that we focused on it over the last couple of years, I think is really telling to the leadership that's happening in this White House and really what we want to change while we're here in our short time. To the second part about what you can do, every state has set up a human trafficking, whether it's not an office, at least a hotline that you can call. I know here in Washington we have the same. And I think it's important for people just to sort of put their differences aside and open their eyes and look what's happening in their neighborhoods and make a difference. And the final thing I'll say is that I am such a believer in the promise of this country and that only a handful of people can change the world. And you think about, it was just our founding fathers, just a handful of them who basically said, no, we're not going to take that anymore, to the most powerful country this world had ever seen. And they were successful. My home state of Texas, the same thing. It really does, and I've seen it here at the White House, it really does just take a handful of people to really change everything. And I think that's the real purpose that's driving this issue for us at the White House, human trafficking. But really, it crosses every issue we work on and what we're doing to help all Americans, but especially those who need it the most.